I spent 27 years with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. 27 years analyzing evidence, interviewing witnesses, and closing cases that most people would consider impossible. But nothing in my career prepared me for what I discovered buried in classified files deep within the FBI's National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime. My name is Raymond Kellerman, and I'm about to violate every non-disclosure agreement I signed when I retired in 2023, because some truths are too important to die with the people who know them. What I'm going to tell you involves 4 missing person cases that were officially closed as unsolved disappearances. But the real files, the ones that never made it to public record, tell a very different story. A story that connects these vanishings to something the government has known about for decades but refuses to acknowledge. Something that's been living in our forests since long before we built cities and roads through their territory. It started for me in 1998. I was 34 years old, relatively new to the behavioral analysis unit at Quantico, still eager to prove myself among the veterans who'd spent decades profiling serial killers and tracking the most dangerous criminals in America. That's when a case file landed on my desk that would change everything I thought I knew about what was possible in this world. The file was labeled Rachel Morrison, 26 years old, disappeared July 14, 1997 from the Mount Hood National Forest in Oregon. She'd been an experienced wilderness guide, someone who knew those forests better than most people knew their own neighborhoods. She'd led dozens of groups through that terrain without incident, but on that July day, she'd gone out alone for what should have been a routine day hike on a trail she'd walked hundreds of times before. Her boyfriend reported her missing when she didn't return by nightfall. Search and rescue teams were deployed within hours. They found her car exactly where she'd left it, at the Timberline Trail parking area. Her pack was locked in the trunk, which was odd because experienced hikers don't leave their gear behind. But what really troubled the investigators was what they found about 2 miles up the trail: her hiking boots. Both of them, placed neatly side by side in the middle of the path, laces still tied as if she'd simply stepped out of them and walked away. Next to the boots was her watch, a Timex Ironman she wore constantly according to her boyfriend, and a small silver bracelet her mother had given her for her 21st birthday. The items were arranged carefully, deliberately, not scattered as they would be in a struggle or animal attack. The search continued for 3 weeks. More than 200 volunteers combed that forest. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew grid patterns. Bloodhounds followed scent trails that led nowhere, ending abruptly at locations that made no sense. It was as if Rachel Morrison had simply vanished into thin air. The case went cold, filed away as another tragic disappearance in the vast wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. Except it wasn't filed away entirely. Someone at the FBI's Portland field office had flagged the case with a specific notation, a code I didn't recognize, X-1793. When I asked my supervisor what it meant, he looked at me for a long moment before saying I should focus on more conventional cases, but I couldn't let it go. Something about those neatly arranged boots haunted me. I started digging through archived files using the code as a search parameter. What I found was a pattern that no one wanted to acknowledge. Over the previous 30 years, there had been 43 missing person cases across the Pacific Northwest, all flagged with variations of that same code, all sharing specific characteristics that set them apart from typical disappearances: remote forest locations, experienced outdoors people who knew the terrain, personal items found arranged in deliberate patterns, search dogs losing scent trails in places that made no logical sense. And in 12 of those cases, witnesses reported seeing large, unidentified figures in the woods near the time of the disappearances. Figures that moved on 2 legs but were far too large to be human. The unofficial name for these cases, within a very small circle at the FBI, was the Forrest Walker Files. But officially, they didn't exist. There was no task force, no dedicated investigation, no acknowledgement that these cases might be connected. Just a notation system that allowed certain agents to track patterns without ever having to explain what they were tracking. I became obsessed with understanding why. Why would the FBI, an organization built on solving crimes and finding truth, actively suppress investigation into a pattern of disappearances? The answer came 6 months later when I was called into a meeting I hadn't requested. The conference room was in a section of Quantico I'd never accessed before. Underground, requiring special clearance just to reach the elevator. 3 people were waiting for me. A deputy assistant director from the Criminal Investigative Division, whose name I was told to forget as soon as the meeting ended. A woman from what I later learned was a liaison office between the FBI and the Department of the Interior. And Dr. Michael Thornton, a primatologist from UC Berkeley, who'd consulted on several cases involving wildlife attacks. The deputy assistant director spoke first. "Agent Kellerman, you've been asking questions about cases marked with the X series codes. I want to understand why these cases interest you." I explained my concerns about the pattern, the similarities that suggested something systematic was happening, the evidence that these weren't random disappearances or simple cases of people getting lost in the woods. As I spoke, I watched their faces carefully. They weren't surprised by anything I was saying. They'd heard it all before. When I finished, Dr. Thornton opened a briefcase and pulled out a file folder. Inside were photographs. The first showed a footprint in mud, clearly defined, measuring at least 18 inches long with 5 distinct toes. The second showed a hair sample under magnification, coarse and reddish-brown with a structure unlike any known primate. The third was a plaster cast of another footprint, this one showing dermal ridges, the equivalent of fingerprints, in a pattern that proved it wasn't a fake. And the fourth photograph made my breath catch. It was taken with a trail camera in Olympic National Forest, dated 3 months earlier. The image quality was grainy, typical of motion-activated cameras, but clear enough to see what had triggered it. A figure, massive and covered in dark hair, walking upright through the trees. It was looking directly at the camera, and even in that grainy image, I could see intelligence in its eyes. Awareness that it had been photographed. "Agent Kellerman," the deputy assistant director said quietly, "what you've discovered is real. The pattern exists. The disappearances are connected. And yes, they involve what the public calls Bigfoot or Sasquatch. The government has known about these creatures since at least 1967, possibly longer. We have physical evidence, DNA samples, documented sightings from credible witnesses, including law enforcement and military personnel. We know they exist. We know approximately where they live. And we know they've been involved in human disappearances." I sat there trying to process what I was hearing. Everything I'd been taught about the scientific method, about evidence and proof, said this was impossible. But the evidence was right in front of me. Photographs, DNA, footprints that no human could have made. "Why isn't this public?" I asked. "Why hide something this significant?" The woman from the Interior Department answered, "Because revealing it would cause panic. Because it would lead to widespread hunting and attempts to capture them, which would almost certainly result in their extinction and significant loss of human life. These creatures are intelligent, Agent Kellerman. They're also incredibly strong and dangerous when threatened. They've survived by hiding from us for thousands of years. The moment we acknowledge their existence publicly, that changes forever. But people are disappearing," I said. "Families deserve to know what happened to their loved ones. They deserve the truth." "Some truths cause more harm than good," the deputy assistant director replied. "The official policy at the highest levels of government is containment. We monitor the populations. We track incidents. We do everything we can to prevent encounters. But we don't acknowledge. We don't reveal. We don't confirm. Dr. Thornton leaned forward. Agent Kellerman, I've spent 15 years studying these creatures from a distance. I've analyzed hundreds of samples. I've watched them through telephoto lenses from miles away. And I can tell you with certainty that they are not mindless animals. They have social structures, family groups, possibly even language. They also have territorial instincts and behaviors we don't fully understand. The disappearances you've identified are real, but they're complex. Some may be defensive responses to humans entering their territory. Some may be cases of mistaken identity or accidents, and some, he paused, looking uncomfortable, may be predatory behavior from individuals acting outside normal patterns. We simply don't know enough yet. That meeting lasted 4 hours. They showed me more files, more evidence, more cases that had been buried under layers of classification and misdirection. By the time I left that underground conference room, I understood that I'd been given a choice: stop investigating and continue my career in blissful ignorance, or become part of a very small group within the FBI that knew the truth and worked in the shadows to manage a situation the public could never learn about. I chose to know. I wish I could say I chose it because of some noble desire for truth or justice, but really it was simpler than that. I had to understand. I had to know what happened to Rachel Morrison and the dozens of others like her, so I became part of what we privately called the X Unit. Not an official designation, just a handful of agents across different field offices who tracked these cases, who investigated when necessary, who worked to prevent encounters between humans and the creatures we weren't supposed to believe in. Over the next 25 years, I worked on 17 cases directly connected to Sasquatch activity. I saw evidence that would make believers out of the staunchest skeptics. I interviewed witnesses who'd seen things that terrified them so completely they never spoke of it again. I stood in forests where I could feel I was being watched by something that understood I was there, that was choosing whether to reveal itself or remain hidden. And I learned things about these creatures that the public doesn't know. Things that would change how people think about wilderness, about nature, about our place in the world. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the 4 cases I mentioned at the beginning. 4 disappearances that I investigated personally. 4 families whose lives were shattered by something they could never be told the truth about. Cases that represent the reality of what happens when human beings and Sasquatch cross paths in ways that end in tragedy. The first case, Rachel Morrison, took me years to solve. Years of returning to Mount Hood, of studying the terrain, of understanding the patterns of movement through that forest. What I eventually discovered was that the area where Rachel disappeared was part of a migration corridor used by a small family group of Sasquatch. 3 individuals based on the tracks and evidence we found: an adult male, an adult female, and a juvenile. They moved through that region seasonally, following food sources and maintaining territorial boundaries with other groups. The trail where Rachel was hiking passed directly through the center of their territory. She'd walked it dozens of times before without incident because the timing had never coincided with their presence. But on July 14, 1997, she was there at the same time they were. We found evidence of the encounter 3 years later during a systematic search of the area, not where the original search had focused, but almost 4 miles away in terrain so rough the initial searchers had deemed it impassable. There was a small cave, really more of an overhang in a cliff face, hidden behind a thick growth of manzanita bushes. Inside that cave, we found Rachel Morrison's remains, not scattered by animals or decomposed beyond recognition, but laid out carefully, deliberately. Her body was positioned as if sleeping, hands folded across her chest, covered with branches and leaves in what could only be described as a burial ritual. Next to her remains were her other personal effects: her wallet with her ID intact, a small notebook she'd been carrying, even a protein bar from her pocket, uneaten, placed beside her carefully. The forensic analysis told a story we could piece together, but would never be able to prove in a court of law. Rachel had encountered the Sasquatch on the trail. Whether she was startled and ran, whether she tried to photograph them, whether it was simple bad timing when the adult male felt threatened, we'd never know for certain. But the evidence suggested a defensive response, not a predatory attack. The creatures had killed her quickly. The forensic pathologist confirmed death would have been nearly instantaneous from the nature of her injuries. And then something remarkable had happened, something that changed how I understood these beings. They'd carried her body miles through difficult terrain to a place of apparent significance to them. They'd arranged her carefully with what appeared to be respect or even remorse. They'd performed something that looked very much like a funeral rite. Dr. Thornton examined the site personally. He spent 3 days studying every detail, taking samples, documenting everything. When he emerged from that forest, his hands were shaking. "Agent Kellerman," he said to me, "I've been studying primate behavior for 30 years. I've watched gorillas mourn their dead. I've seen chimpanzees comfort each other in grief. But this is something else entirely. This suggests a level of self-awareness, of moral understanding, of empathy that we've only ever attributed to humans. They killed her, possibly in a moment of fear or territorial defense, and then they grieved for what they'd done. They tried to honor her in death." I stood at the cave entrance looking at where Rachel Morrison had been laid to rest by creatures that weren't supposed to exist. Creatures that had taken her life and then treated her. Remains with more dignity than many humans show their own dead. The burial showed us something profound about these beings, something that made the government's policy of concealment even more complicated. These weren't simple animals acting on instinct. These were intelligent creatures capable of complex emotions, moral reasoning, and ritualistic behavior, which made every encounter, every interaction, every death infinitely more tragic. We couldn't tell Rachel's family the truth. Her mother and father, who'd spent 3 years hoping she might still be alive somewhere, who'd never given up searching, never stopped hoping for answers. We told them we'd found her remains, that she'd died from injuries sustained in a fall, that she'd been in a remote area the initial search hadn't reached. We gave them closure of a sort. We gave them a body to bury, but we couldn't give them the truth. We couldn't tell them that their daughter had been killed by something the government insisted didn't exist, then honored by those same creatures in a way that suggested they understood the gravity of what they'd done. That was 1999, the first case that taught me the real cost of knowing the truth. The second case came in 2003. Daniel Chen, 32 years old, a software engineer from Seattle who loved wilderness photography. He'd gone into the North Cascades National Park in mid-September, planning to photograph the fall colors and hoping to spot some of the area's famous wildlife. He'd posted on a nature photography forum about his plans, mentioned he was heading to a remote area near Thunder Creek where he'd heard rumors of unusual animal activity. Other photographers had reported seeing large shadows moving through the trees, hearing vocalizations that didn't match any known species in the region. Daniel thought he might capture something unique. He never came back. His girlfriend reported him missing when he didn't return after 5 days. 2 days passed when he'd said he'd be home. The Park Service found his car at the Thunder Creek trailhead. His camping gear was still in the back, which immediately raised red flags. An experienced backpacker doesn't leave essential equipment behind. Search teams found his campsite about 8 miles in, tent still standing, sleeping bag laid out, camera equipment carefully stored in waterproof cases. Everything was orderly, organized, exactly as someone would leave it if they stepped away for a short hike and planned to return. But Daniel Chen never returned. The search continued for 6 weeks, one of the longest in the park's history. They found nothing. No body, no additional equipment, no signs of struggle or animal predation, just an abandoned campsite and a mystery that seemed impossible to solve. I was assigned to the case because someone at the Seattle field office noticed similarities to the Rachel Morrison disappearance. Remote location, experienced outdoors person, no logical explanation for the vanishing, and most significantly, 2 separate witnesses reported seeing large upright figures near Thunder Creek in the days before Daniel disappeared. I flew to Seattle and joined the investigation, though officially I was there as a behavioral analyst, helping profile what kind of person might have taken him if this was a criminal abduction. Unofficially, I was there to determine if this was another X-series case, another disappearance connected to Sasquatch activity. I spent 2 weeks in those mountains, walking the trails Daniel would have walked, studying the terrain, looking for evidence that the official search teams wouldn't have recognized, and I found it. About 12 miles from Daniel's campsite, in an area so remote that even experienced hikers rarely ventured there, I discovered tracks. Massive footprints in soft ground near a creek, measuring 19 inches long and 7 inches wide. The stride length between prints was over 6 feet. No human could have made those tracks. I followed them for almost 3 miles, watching how they moved through the terrain with an efficiency that suggested intimate knowledge of the landscape. The tracks led me to a narrow canyon I would have missed entirely if I hadn't been following the trail. The entrance was hidden behind a rockfall that looked natural, but had clearly been arranged deliberately to conceal what lay beyond. Inside that canyon, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a collection site, that's the only way I could describe it. Along one wall of the canyon, arranged on natural rock shelves, were personal items from multiple people. A backpack, faded and weathered, a pair of hiking boots, a compass, a water bottle with a carabiner still attached, a digital camera, its battery long dead, and right there, unmistakable even from a distance, Daniel Chen's camera bag. I approached the camera bag carefully, documenting everything with my own camera before touching anything. The bag was weathered but intact, protected from the elements by the canyon overhang. Inside, I found Daniel's camera, a Canon EOS with a telephoto lens still attached. The memory card was still in place. My hands trembled slightly as I removed it, knowing that whatever images were stored on that card might provide answers to questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. I didn't examine the other items in detail that day. I couldn't risk disturbing what was clearly a significant site. Instead, I photographed everything, documented the exact location, and carefully extracted just the camera bag and memory card. Then I did something that went against every investigative instinct I'd developed in my career. I left everything else exactly as I'd found it, because I understood what I was looking at. This wasn't a trophy collection from a predator. This was something else entirely, a memorial site, a place where items belonging to deceased humans were being kept, preserved, arranged with care. The Sasquatch weren't just killing people who wandered into their territory, they were remembering them. Back in Seattle, I had the memory card analyzed by the FBI's digital forensics team. They recovered 147 images Daniel Chen had taken during his time in the North Cascades. The first 130 showed exactly what you'd expect. Beautiful landscape photography, fall colors, wildlife shots of deer and birds, a few selfies of Daniel at his campsite, grinning at the camera, excited about his adventure. But images 131 through 147 told a different story. Image 131 showed trees, just trees at first glance. But when the forensics team enhanced the image, we could see a shape partially obscured by branches. Large, dark, watching. Image 132 was slightly blurred, taken quickly as if Daniel had been moving. It showed the same trees from a different angle, and the shape had moved closer, clearer now, unmistakably bipedal. Images 133 through 139 documented Daniel's awareness that he was being watched, being followed. Each photo showed the figure getting progressively closer, always staying partially concealed, but clearly tracking him. The timestamps showed these photos were taken over a period of about 40 minutes. Image 140 was the most disturbing. It was crystal clear, perfectly focused, taken from less than 20 feet away. The Sasquatch had stopped hiding. It stood in a small clearing facing Daniel's camera directly. Male, I'd guess, based on the size and build. Probably close to 9 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair that was graying around the face and shoulders. The expression on its face was impossible to misinterpret. Not aggression, not curiosity. Something closer to resignation or sadness, as if it knew what was about to happen and regretted the necessity of it. The final 7 images were chaotic. Blurred motion, ground, sky, darkness. The timestamps showed they were taken within a span of 11 seconds, then nothing. The camera had stopped recording. Dr. Thornton studied those images for hours. He enhanced them, analyzed every detail, compared the Sasquatch in the photos to other documented sightings. Finally, he gave me his assessment. This individual is old, he said. Very old by their standards. I'd estimate this creature is somewhere between 60 and 80 years old, based on the graying patterns and physical build. And look at this. He pointed to the Sasquatch's left arm in image 140. See that scarring? That's not from a recent injury. Those are old wounds, probably decades old. Burns, I think. This creature has lived a long, hard life. Why would it approach Daniel so directly, I asked. Every other documented encounter suggests they avoid humans, stay hidden. Dr. Thornton was quiet for a moment. Territorial defense, he said finally. Based on where this happened, Daniel had walked deep into what appears to be a core territory for a family group. He didn't just pass through, he made camp. He stayed. From the Sasquatch's perspective, this was an intruder who refused to leave despite being given chances. You can see in the progression of images that it followed him for 40 minutes. That was a warning period. When Daniel didn't leave, when he instead started photographing, documenting, the creature made a decision. We never found Daniel Chen's body. I returned to that canyon 3 more times over the following year, but there was nothing beyond that collection of personal items. The Sasquatch had dealt with his remains in some way we couldn't determine. Perhaps they had burial sites we'd never discovered. Perhaps they disposed of bodies in ways that left no trace. I didn't know. What I did know was that Daniel's camera bag remained in that canyon, added to a collection that represented decades of fatal encounters between humans and creatures that wanted nothing more than to be left alone. I couldn't tell Daniel's family what I'd discovered. His parents, his girlfriend, his younger sister who'd idolized him. I gave them the camera, told them we'd found it near where he'd last been seen, suggested he might have fallen and been carried away by the creek's current before we'd found the site. Another lie. Another family left with partial truth and fabricated closure. But I kept copies of those final images. I studied them late at night in my office, staring at that old Sasquatch's face, seeing something in its eyes that haunted me. Regret. Sorrow. Knowledge that the world was changing, that its kind was running out of places to hide, that encounters like this were becoming inevitable as humans pushed deeper into the last remaining wilderness. That was 2003. The second case that showed me these creatures weren't monsters. They were desperate. The third case happened in 2009, and it was different from the others in ways that disturbed me deeply. Jennifer Whitmore, 24 years old, a graduate student in environmental science at the University of Montana. She'd been conducting field research in the Flathead National Forest, studying the impact of climate change on old-growth ecosystems. Her research site was remote, requiring a 2-day hike to reach. But Jennifer was experienced and well-prepared. She'd been making the trip every 2 weeks for 6 months without incident, collecting samples, taking measurements, documenting changes in the forest. On August 3, 2009, she hiked in for what should have been a routine 4-day research visit. She had a satellite phone for emergencies and a check-in schedule with her faculty advisor. When she missed her first scheduled check-in on August 5th, her advisor waited 12 hours before contacting authorities. Maybe the satellite phone battery had died. Maybe she'd simply lost track of time. But when she missed the second check-in on August 6th, a search was initiated. They found her research camp intact, tent properly staked, equipment organized, her backpack with supplies for several more days. Her satellite phone was in the tent, fully charged but turned off. Her research notebooks were stacked neatly on a rock, protected by a waterproof case. Everything suggested she'd left camp briefly and planned to return, but she never did. The search teams covered hundreds of square miles. They used helicopters, search dogs, thermal imaging, everything available to modern search and rescue operations. They found nothing, not a single trace of Jennifer Whitmore beyond her abandoned camp. I was assigned to the case because of a detail that the local authorities thought was insignificant, but that sent red flags through the X-Unit database. 3 days before Jennifer disappeared, she'd called her advisor excited about a discovery. She'd found what she described as unusual tracks near her research site. Large bipedal prints that didn't match any animal she recognized. She'd taken plaster casts and photographs, was planning to show them to a wildlife biology colleague when she returned. Those casts and photographs were never found. I arrived in Montana a week after Jennifer disappeared. The search was still active, but hope was fading. I spoke with her advisor, Dr. Patricia Hall, who showed me field notes Jennifer had sent via email the day before she vanished. The notes described her discovery in detail. Footprints measuring approximately 17 inches long, stride length of 5.5 feet, clear toe impressions suggesting a flexible foot structure unlike bears or any known primate in North America. Jennifer's notes were clinical, scientific, but I could read the excitement between the lines. She thought she'd discovered evidence of an unknown species. She had no idea what she'd really found. I hiked to Jennifer's research site with a small team. 2 park rangers who knew the area well, and Agent Sarah Chen from the Seattle field office, one of the handful of agents read into X-Unit cases. The hike took us 2 full days through some of the most beautiful and isolated forest I'd ever seen. Ancient cedars that had been standing for 500 years, clearings filled with wildflowers, streams so clear you could see every stone on the bottom. It was the kind of place that reminded you why people fell in love with wilderness. It was also the kind of place where you could disappear without a trace. Jennifer's camp was exactly as described. We searched the immediate area carefully, looking for any evidence the initial search teams might have missed. Agent Chen found something interesting about 40 yards from the tent. A tree with unusual markings, deep scratches in the bark, high up, at least 8 feet off the ground. The scratches were fresh, made within the past few weeks. She photographed them carefully, took measurements. "These aren't from any animal that should be in this forest," she said quietly. "Bears don't scratch that high. And look at the pattern. Those are from something with opposable digits. Fingers, not claws. I examined the scratches myself. She was right. Whatever had made those marks had hands. Large hands with significant strength. The bark had been gouged deep, wood splinters scattered on the ground below. This was territorial marking, a warning. We expanded our search radius, moving carefully through the dense forest. About a mile north of the camp, following a deer trail that wound between massive trees, we found the first sign that something was very wrong. Blood, not a lot, but enough to be concerning. Droplets on leaves, a smear on a fallen log. We followed the trail, documenting everything. Our hands on our weapons, even though regulations said we shouldn't be armed in a national forest. Those regulations were written by people who didn't know what we knew. The blood trail led us to a small ravine, steep-sided and heavily vegetated. At the bottom, partially concealed by ferns, we found Jennifer's jacket, the one she'd been wearing according to her last video check-in with her advisor. It was torn, ripped along the back as if something had grabbed her from behind. The blood on the jacket matched the droplets we'd followed, but there was something else with the jacket that made my skin crawl. A bundle of sticks woven together in an intricate pattern tied with strips of bark. It was sitting on top of the jacket, placed deliberately. I'd never seen anything like it. Agent Chen photographed it from every angle before we carefully collected it as evidence. When we got it back to the lab, Dr. Thornton examined it with an intensity I'd rarely seen from him. "This is a marker," he said finally. "I've seen similar constructions in great ape populations. Chimpanzees create them to mark territorial boundaries. Gorillas make them as part of nesting behavior. But this," he turned the woven sticks carefully, "this is more complex than anything I've seen from any known primate. The pattern is deliberate, mathematical almost. This took intelligence and time to create, and it was left with Jennifer's jacket for a reason." "What reason?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Dr. Thornton met my eyes. "It's a claim marker. Whatever took Jennifer left this to indicate she belonged to them now, that she was in their territory, under their control. It's a message to any other of their kind who might pass through, and possibly," he hesitated, "possibly a message to us, if they knew we'd come looking." The search for Jennifer Whitmore continued for 3 more months. Teams combed that forest repeatedly, but we found nothing beyond the jacket and the blood trail. No body, no additional evidence, no sign of where she'd been taken or what had happened to her. The case officially remained open but inactive. Another unsolved disappearance in the vast wilderness of Montana. But I kept investigating quietly, on my own time. I studied maps of the area, looking for patterns. I interviewed hunters and hikers who'd spent time in that region, asking carefully worded questions about unusual sightings, and slowly, over months, I pieced together a picture that was deeply disturbing. There had been other disappearances in that area over the years. Not many, maybe one every 5 or 6 years, but consistent, and they all shared characteristics. Young women, almost exclusively, hiking alone or in small groups, experienced enough to be in remote areas but not experienced enough to recognize warnings. 6 cases over 34 years, all unsolved, all in roughly the same 100-square-mile area of the Flathead National Forest. Dr. Thornton and I spent hours discussing what this pattern might mean. The most disturbing theory we developed was that this wasn't random predation or territorial defense. This was selective targeting, as if a particular individual or small group had developed a specific behavior that fell outside normal Sasquatch patterns, like a rogue animal that learns to hunt humans because they're easier prey than wild game. Except these weren't animals, these were intelligent beings making choices. And that made everything infinitely worse, because it suggested capacity for cruelty, for hunting, for behaviors we associated with the darkest aspects of human nature. I couldn't tell Jennifer's family any of this. her parents who'd spent their life savings funding private searches, her younger brother who still made trips to Montana, hoping to find some trace of his sister. I told them we'd found evidence suggesting she'd been injured in a fall, that her remains might have been scattered by wildlife, that the forest had simply taken her. More lies, more families destroyed by truths they could never be told. That was 2009. The third case that showed me these creatures, for all their intelligence and complexity, were still capable of darkness, still capable of taking human life not in self-defense or territorial protection, but for reasons we might never understand. The fourth and final case I want to tell you about happened in 2017, and it's the one that ultimately made me decide to retire, made me realize I couldn't keep doing this work, couldn't keep burying truths and lying to families, couldn't keep pretending that the government's policy of concealment was justified. Thomas Pike, 41 years old, a documentary filmmaker from Portland. He'd spent 5 years researching Bigfoot sightings, interviewing witnesses, examining evidence. His goal was to create a serious scientific documentary that would finally provide proof of the creature's existence. He'd compiled hundreds of hours of interviews, collected testimonies from law enforcement and park rangers, analyzed footprint casts and hair samples, and he'd become convinced he knew where to look to find his proof. Thomas Pike had narrowed his search to a specific region of the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington, a remote area near Mount Adams where sightings had been reported consistently for decades, where tracks had been found, where strange vocalizations had been recorded, where multiple credible witnesses had reported encounters with something that didn't match any known animal. Thomas had planned a 3-week expedition into that area in September 2017. He'd hired an experienced guide, rented high-end camera equipment, even brought along a sound engineer to capture audio evidence. He'd posted about his plans on social media, shared his research on a popular cryptozoology forum, talked enthusiastically in interviews about how this trip would finally provide the proof the scientific community demanded. I saw his posts, I saw his interviews, and I felt a cold dread settling in my chest because I knew exactly what area he was planning to search. It was flagged in our X-Unit database as a high-activity zone, a place where Sasquatch presence had been documented repeatedly over the years, a place we'd had multiple incidents, multiple disappearances, multiple cases that had ended badly. I tried to intervene. I contacted the Forest Service, suggested they might want to close that area for the season, cite fire danger or trail maintenance or any excuse that would keep people out. But bureaucratic processes move slowly, and Thomas Pike moved fast. By the time closures could have been implemented, he was already deep in the forest, beyond reach of any warning I could send. Thomas maintained a satellite communication link, posting updates twice daily to his website. For the first week, his reports were exactly what you'd expect. Beautiful descriptions of the forest, excitement about being in wilderness, occasional notes about possible signs, a broken branch here, an unusual vocalization there. Nothing definitive, but enough to keep him hopeful. On day 9, his morning update mentioned finding a set of tracks near his base camp. Large, clear impressions in soft ground near a creek. He'd taken casts, photographed them extensively, and was convinced they were genuine. The excitement in his writing was palpable. That evening's update never came. When Thomas missed his scheduled check-in, his team back in Portland waited several hours before trying to raise him on the satellite phone. No response. They tried repeatedly throughout the night. By morning, when there was still no contact, they notified authorities. I got the call 12 hours later. Agent Kellerman, the voice on the phone, said, "We have a situation in Gifford-Pinchot. Documentary filmmaker missing. Last known location is in one of your flagged zones." You need to get here now. I was on a plane to Washington. Within 3 hours, by the time I arrived at the search staging area, multiple teams were already preparing to deploy. Park rangers, county search and rescue, FBI agents from the Seattle office, and something unusual, military presence. 3 men in civilian clothes but with unmistakable military bearing, driving an unmarked vehicle with government plates. They were from a unit I'd heard whispers about, but never confirmed existed, a specialized team within the Department of Defense that dealt with what they termed biological anomalies in federal lands. I approached the senior man, a colonel whose name tag read Harrison. "Colonel," I said, showing my credentials, "FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit. This is my case." Harrison looked at me with eyes that had seen things that made him tired and wary. "Agent Kellerman," he said, "I know who you are. I know about the X unit, and I'm here to tell you, this situation is now under DOD jurisdiction. Your filmmaker friend went somewhere he shouldn't have gone, found something he shouldn't have found, and now we need to contain this before it becomes an incident that can't be buried." "What do you mean he found something?" I asked, though part of me already knew. Harrison pulled out a tablet computer, brought up an image. This was uploaded to Pike's cloud storage 6 hours before he went silent. It's been scrubbed from public access, but we have the original. The image made my blood run cold. It was taken at dusk, the light fading but still clear enough to see details. The photo showed a forest clearing, and in that clearing were 4 Sasquatch, 2 adults and 2 juveniles. They were engaged in what could only be described as a social gathering. One adult was grooming the other, removing debris from their fur, in a behavior I'd only seen documented in great apes. The juveniles were playing, wrestling with each other in a way that looked almost human, and all 4 of them were clearly visible, undeniably real, captured in high-definition detail that left no room for doubt or dismissal. This was the proof Thomas Pike had been searching for. Definitive evidence that Sasquatch existed, that they had social structures, that they were thriving in remote forests right under our noses. It was exactly what he'd wanted to find, and it had probably gotten him killed. We found Thomas Pike's camp 3 days later. It was demolished, not just abandoned, destroyed. His tent had been ripped apart, fabric shredded and scattered. His equipment was smashed, cameras broken, recording devices crushed. His supplies were scattered across a 100-yard radius. It looked like a hurricane had hit the site. But there was no storm damage anywhere else. Just his camp, just his equipment, just everything that might have contained evidence of what he'd seen. We found Thomas's body a quarter-mile from the camp. He'd tried to run. We could trace his path through broken vegetation, dropped items, signs of panicked flight, but he'd never had a chance. Whatever had chased him was faster, stronger, and knew the terrain far better than he ever could. The cause of death was massive trauma, multiple broken bones, internal injuries consistent with being struck by something with tremendous force. The medical examiner told me death would have been quick, at least. That was the only mercy in the situation. But what disturbed me most was what we found near Thomas's body. Another one of those woven stick structures, larger and more complex than the one we'd found with Jennifer Whitmore's jacket, and carved into a tree above where he lay, marks that were clearly deliberate. Symbols, almost. Patterns that suggested communication, language. Dr. Thornton examined the carvings for hours. "I think this is a warning," he said finally, "not to us necessarily, but to their own kind. This mark says something equivalent to danger or boundary violation or punishment for transgression. They're documenting what happened here, recording it for others to see. They have a justice system, Agent Kellerman. They have laws. And Thomas Pike broke them by documenting their existence, by capturing images that could have exposed them to the world. I stood in that forest looking at Thomas Pike's body, at the evidence of what had happened to him, and I felt something break inside me. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a tragic case of wrong place, wrong time. This was an execution, deliberate, calculated, meant to send a message. The Sasquatch had killed Thomas Pike, not because he'd threatened them physically, but because he'd threatened their existence in a different way. He'd tried to prove they were real. And they'd made sure he paid for that choice. Colonel Harrison and his team took control of the scene. They confiscated all evidence, all photographs, all documentation. They told the local authorities this was now classified under national security protocols. Thomas Pike's body was released to his family with a death certificate that listed cause of death as injuries from wildlife attack. Specifics redacted due to ongoing investigation. His footage, his research, his years of work, all of it disappeared into government archives where it would never see public light. I filed my report with the X unit. I documented everything I'd seen, everything I'd learned, and then I submitted my retirement papers. 27 years with the FBI, and I was done. I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't keep lying to families. Couldn't keep burying evidence of what I knew to be true. Couldn't keep participating in a system that valued concealment over truth, that allowed intelligent beings to kill humans to protect their secrecy, while we did nothing except clean up the aftermath and maintain the lie. My supervisor tried to talk me out of it. "Agent Kellerman," he said, "you're one of the best investigators in the Bureau. You understand these cases better than anyone. We need you." "You need someone who still believes this is right," I replied. "Someone who can look at grieving families and lie to their faces without it destroying them. That's not me anymore. I can't be that person." I retired in March 2018. I moved to a small town in Vermont, about as far from Sasquatch territory as you can get in the continental United States. I tried to put it all behind me, tried to live a quiet, normal life. But you can't unknow what you know. You can't unsee what you've seen. The faces of those families haunted me. Rachel Morrison's mother, who'd spent 3 years hoping her daughter was alive. Daniel Chen's girlfriend, who'd blamed herself for not insisting he take someone with him on that trip. Jennifer Whitmore's parents, who'd exhausted their savings searching for answers. Thomas Pike's wife, who'd tried to continue his research, to honor his memory by finishing what he'd started until government agents convinced her it would be dangerous to do so. They all deserved the truth. They all deserved to know what had happened to their loved ones. And they'd all been given lies because the truth was too inconvenient, too disruptive, too dangerous to reveal. For 5 years, I kept silent. I honored the non-disclosure agreements I'd signed, maintained the secrecy I'd sworn to uphold. But I'm 61 years old now. I have chronic health issues that will probably shorten my remaining time, and I've realized that some truths are too important to die unspoken. The families of Rachel Morrison, Daniel Chen, Jennifer Whitmore, and Thomas Pike deserve to know what happened. The public deserves to know that there are intelligent beings living in our forests, beings that have been there far longer than we have, beings that are running out of places to hide as human civilization expands into every remaining corner of wilderness. Are the Sasquatch dangerous? Yes. They're powerful, territorial, and capable of violence when they feel threatened. They've killed people. The 4 cases I've described are not isolated incidents. There are dozens more in classified files. Dozens of disappearances that were never solved because the truth was too inconvenient to acknowledge. But here's what the government doesn't want you to know. The Sasquatch aren't mindless monsters. They're not serial killers stalking the forests for victims. Every case I've investigated, every death I've documented, has occurred because of human intrusion into their territory, because we've pushed into the last remaining wild spaces where they've tried to survive, hidden, because we've refused to acknowledge their existence, which means we've refused to protect the habitats they need, because we've made them choose between exposure and violence, and they've chosen to fight for their survival the only way they know how. Rachel Morrison walked into their territory during a sensitive time, probably when they had young to protect. Daniel Chen documented their location, their presence, creating records that could have brought others searching. Jennifer Whitmore found evidence of their existence and planned to share it with the scientific community. Thomas Pike tried to prove they were real, to show the world what we've been hiding. Each of them died because the Sasquatch saw them as existential threats. And in a sense, they were right, because the moment their existence is confirmed publicly, everything changes. Hunters will go looking for trophies. Scientists will want to capture and study them. The government will have to address the fact that we share this country with another intelligent species. The forests they've called home for thousands of years will become tourist destinations, gawking grounds, places where privacy and secrecy become impossible. So I understand why they kill to protect that secrecy. I don't condone it, but I understand it. They're fighting for survival. Every human they encounter is a potential end to their way of life, a possible chain of events that leads to their extinction. They've watched us drive countless species into oblivion. They've seen what we do to things we want to possess, study, control, and they've decided that remaining hidden, even if it means occasionally killing to maintain that secrecy, is better than the alternative. The government knows all of this. They have evidence, documentation, physical proof that Sasquatch exist. They have DNA samples that confirm these creatures are a separate species of great ape. They have hair and tissue samples. They have footprint casts that show dermal ridges proving they're not fakes. They have photographs and videos from trail cameras. They have testimony from hundreds of credible witnesses, including their own personnel. And they've chosen to bury all of it, to maintain the fiction that Bigfoot is just a myth, just a legend, just a creature of folklore and hoaxes. Why? Because acknowledging the truth would require action. It would require designating massive areas of federal land as protected habitat. It would require explaining decades of concealment. It would require admitting that an unknown species has been living among us, occasionally killing people, while the government knew and did nothing. The political and legal ramifications would be catastrophic, so they maintain the lie. They flag cases with secret codes. They send agents like me to investigate quietly, to document privately, to ensure families get just enough closure to stop asking questions while never learning the real truth. They let the Sasquatch continue to exist in the shadows, continue to defend their territory the only way they can, continue to kill when necessary to protect the secrecy that protects their survival. But I can't be part of that anymore. I can't carry these secrets to my grave knowing that families are still suffering, still wondering, still hoping for answers I could have given them. So I'm breaking every agreement I signed. I'm violating every oath I took. I'm telling you this story, sharing these cases, revealing what the government has spent decades hiding. Will they come after me? Probably. I'll likely face legal consequences for this disclosure. I might be arrested, prosecuted, imprisoned, but I'm old and I'm sick and I don't particularly care anymore. Some things matter more than personal consequences. If you're reading this, if this account reaches you before it's suppressed, I want you to know several things. First, if you hike in remote wilderness areas, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, be aware that you're not alone. The forests have other residents, ancient and intelligent, who don't want to be disturbed. Respect their space. Don't search for them. Don't try to document them. The price of that curiosity might be higher than you're willing to pay. Second, if someone you love has disappeared in wilderness areas under mysterious circumstances, if search teams found nothing, if the case went cold with no logical explanation, consider the possibility that you're not being told the whole truth. Demand answers. File Freedom of Information Act requests. Push for records that might be classified. Make enough noise that concealment becomes more trouble than revelation. Third, pressure your representatives to address this situation honestly. Demand that the government acknowledge what it knows. Demand protection for these creatures and their habitat. Demand transparency about disappearances in national forests. The policy of concealment isn't protecting anyone. It's putting hikers at risk by hiding the reality of what they might encounter. It's denying families the truth about what happened to their loved ones. It's allowing an intelligent species to be pushed toward extinction without any public awareness or discussion of how to prevent it. The Sasquatch are real. They've been real this entire time, hiding in the forests we cleared, surviving in the spaces we haven't yet destroyed, living according to rules and cultures we barely understand. They're not the gentle giants of legend. They're not harmless creatures that just want to be left alone. They're complex beings capable of both remarkable compassion, like the burial they gave Rachel Morrison, and calculated violence, like the execution of Thomas Pike. They're intelligent enough to understand consequences, to make moral choices, to weigh the cost of their actions, and they've chosen to kill when necessary, to protect their existence from a species that's proven time and again we destroy what we cannot control. 4 families I know personally have lived with incomplete truths, with fabricated explanations, with closure that wasn't real. Dozens more families that I've never met have lived with the same lies. How many others are out there? How many more disappearances in our national forests and parks are connected to Sasquatch activity, but will never be acknowledged? How many more people will vanish into the woods because we refuse to admit what's living there alongside us? I don't have those answers, but I know the questions need to be asked. I know the truth needs to be told. I know that the families of Rachel Morrison, Daniel Chen, Jennifer Whitmore, and Thomas Pike deserve better than the lies they were given. So this is my testimony, my confession, my attempt to right some of the wrongs I participated in during my 27 years of keeping secrets. I can't undo the pain those families have suffered. I can't bring back the people who died, but I can at least give them this: the truth about what happened. The knowledge that their loved ones died not in random accidents or simple disappearances, but in encounters with something remarkable and terrible. Something the government has known about for decades, while telling the rest of us it doesn't exist. The FBI agents who recruited me into the X unit told me some truths cause more harm than good. They said revealing the existence of Sasquatch would create panic, would lead to extinction of the species, would cause more problems than it solved. Maybe they were right. Maybe I'm about to cause exactly those problems by breaking my silence. But I've spent 5 years retired, 5 years thinking about those families, 5 years carrying the weight of what I know, and I've decided that the harm of continued concealment outweighs the risks of revelation. People have a right to know what's in those forests. Families have a right to know what happened to the people they loved. And the Sasquatch, for all their capacity for violence, deserve to have their existence acknowledged so we can have honest conversations about how to coexist with them, how to protect them, how to prevent more deaths on both sides of these encounters. This will be my last statement on this subject. I've said what I needed to say. I've shared what I know. What happens next is beyond my control. The government will try to discredit this account, to paint me as a conspiracy theorist or a disturbed former agent spreading disinformation. They'll classify or destroy documentation that might corroborate my story. They'll pressure anyone I've named to deny their involvement. They'll do everything in their considerable power to maintain the concealment that's been policy for decades. But I've made copies. I've shared information with journalists I trust. I've ensured that even if they silence me, the truth will persist. It will be out there for anyone willing to look, willing to question, willing to consider that maybe the government has been lying about what exists in our wildest places. To the families of the 4 people I've written about, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I lied to you when we first met. I'm sorry I participated in concealing the truth about what happened to your loved ones. I'm sorry it took me 5 years of retirement and a terminal diagnosis to find the courage to speak honestly. You deserved better from me, from the FBI, from a government that's supposed to serve truth and justice. I hope this account gives you some measure of real closure, even if it brings new pain in the process. And to the Sasquatch, wherever you are, whoever among you might somehow hear or understand this message, I hope we find a better way. I hope revealing your existence leads not to your destruction, but to protection, to designated habitats, to legal acknowledgement that you have a right to exist. I hope humanity proves capable of coexistence with beings we don't fully understand. But I've seen enough of human nature to know that's probably a naive hope. We don't have a good track record with sharing space with others, especially others we fear or don't comprehend. Still, I hope, because the alternative, a world where you go extinct because we couldn't accept your existence, where more people die because we refuse to acknowledge the reality of what lives in our forests, where lies and concealment continue until there's nothing left to conceal, that alternative is too terrible to accept. So this is my testimony. Take it for what it's worth. Believe it or dismiss it as you choose. But know that somewhere in the classified archives of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, there are files that prove everything I've said. Files marked with X series codes. Files containing evidence of a truth the government has hidden for decades. Files that document encounters between humans and Sasquatch. Encounters that ended in tragedy. Encounters that were buried under layers of deception and official denial. I am Raymond Kellerman. I spent 27 years with the FBI, and this is the truth they didn't want me to tell you. The truth about what's living in our forests. The truth about what happened to people who disappeared without explanation. The truth about 4 cases where Bigfoot was involved, and the dozens more cases just like them. It's all real. It's always been real, and now you know.